hosted by the Elma Francois Institute for Research and Debate of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. Thank you all for finding the time to attend this morning's webinar. My name is 𝘿𝐿𝙞𝙤𝙖𝙡 Frank, and I am an adjunct lecturer at the college. Cipriani is the premier Caribbean tertiary institution for accessible world-class education in labor, cooperatives, and related fields, empowering people to make a positive social and economic impact. For today's webinar, we have three very noble persons on our panel. The first person is Mr. Ian Daniel. He is the head of the Labor Studies Department of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. Next, we have Mrs. Tiffany Powell-Williams. She is the General Secretary of the Jamaica Civil Service Association. And thirdly, we have Dr. Christina J. Kalklau, who is the founder of the Why Not Lab. The focus of our discussions this morning would be first to discuss the impact of digitalization on the world of work. Second, we will discuss the impact of the wider society in the English-speaking Caribbean, which will focus on what workers should be paying attention to. At this time, I will pass you on to our first presenter, who is Mr. Ian Daniel. And before Mr. Daniel speaks, I would give you a little background on who Mr. Daniel is. So as I stated before, Mr. Ian Daniel is the head of the Labor Studies Department in the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. He has lectured in industrial relations, politics, labor history, sociology, and psychology. He is involved in the design and facilitation of specialized and customized training interventions in industrial relation practices, and has been a consultant, writer, researcher, and local community organizer, mass designer, an artist, and a poet. Mr. Daniel is a jack of all trades, and as he fondly calls himself, he's a master of none. Mr. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, and good morning all. Thank you all for being with Cipriani once again this morning to discuss one of the more important developments that has been occurring in recent times, and that has become increasingly important as a consequence of the pandemic, which has widely been accepted as accelerating the impact of digitalization across the world today. As the person in charge of opening the batting, to use the cricket analogy, I want to start by defining some of the important concepts that we're using. I'm asked to look at exploration of digitalization as a transition which can impact the core of social norms and have an impact which reflects the description of this moment as the fourth industrial revolution. It's a kind of inelegant statement. So let's pull out what we need from that bit of word salad there. The first thing is digitalization. The second thing is transition. And the third is the fourth industrial revolution. The third is, right. So I'll define the second comment first, transition, which very simply means changing from one condition to another, or as is becoming more prominent in this discussion, transformation. All right. One of the things that we have to recognize is that society, or Western society, has transformed, has transitioned a number of times in recent history. And we can generalize that as the transition from hunter-gatherer societies to agrarian or agriculturally based societies. Coming closer to home, we're looking at industrial society, which then gave way to the realm that we are now entering into, information societies, and then of course, the smart society, the society based on data. So that's transition. The second important concept is digitalization. I love this concept because everybody seems to know what this concept is, but nobody seems to agree on exactly what it means. It has, in recent times, become used to describe using digital technologies to re-engineer business models and enhance revenue and to enhance value, and applying it primarily in a business environment. But of course, digitalization is occurring in a much wider context than simply business. It affects the state, it affects individual lives as well. And then the next concept, of course, we want to look at is the fourth industrial revolution, which has been tied to the transitions that we described before. The fourth industrial revolution implies that 3 industrial revolutions have already occurred. The first one was the first industrial revolution was based on mechanization and the use of steam power. The second industrial revolution was mass production, and that was based on electricity. The third, automation, and that was based on the introduction of computers and information technology. And the fourth one now, the fourth one is special in that it doesn't actually represent a change of technology. What it does is it represents an intensification of the technology of the third revolution. And so this is the Internet of Things, big data, algorithms, the use of digital information in ways that has hitherto been unknown and untried, and which produces great benefits in terms of how we organize business, how we organize societies, how we organize the things that we do. And so one of the interesting questions, well, there are 2 interesting questions to ask at this point. Which revolution are you? Because it's nice to talk about the fourth industrial revolution, but I live in a part of the world where there are communities that don't have constant supplies of electricity. Not too long ago, Trinidad had an almost nationwide blackout that affected everything. There are some societies that do not have Wi-Fi, dependable supplies of Wi-Fi. So if you have neither of these things, well, clearly you're not fourth. You might be on the cusp of the third, but you may actually be firmly lodged in the second industrial revolution. And that makes a whole, that creates a whole set of implications for what is the fourth industrial revolution? What does it mean for you? And of course, as we're saying, the fourth industrial revolution is about the use of big data, the use of programs that crunch data and that produce outcomes from that. And so the next question is, which algorithm are you? What programs are crunching your data? your data produced from your Internet of Things. I don't know if you've noticed it, but you search for one thing on Google and that search comes up every day on every page you open for the next 6 months. You search for something on TikTok and all of a sudden, everything you get on TikTok is related to that one thing that you search. And so a bubble is literally built around you that is based on big data deciding this is what you're interested in, and we are going to magnify your interest, which also means we're going to cut out the things that might not reflect what you've actually searched for. So I think those are two very interesting questions that we need to ask of ourselves. I want to introduce a fourth concept, which is in the discussion topic as a whole, and that is digital transformation. And what that has come to mean is that we are looking at the integration of digital technology into all areas of business, resulting in fundamental changes in how business operate and how they deliver value to customers. But here's the important part of the definition for me. Beyond that, it's a cultural change that requires organizations to continually challenge the status quo. And the cultural change means, for me, that technology never stands on its own. Technology always stands in relation to people. You cannot have a technological change that does not impact people, that is not determined by people. And so we need to look at that confluence between technology and people instead of giving this, this transformation, this fourth industrial revolution, an agency in and of itself. All right. One of my favorite TED Talk presenters, Nelson Phillips, he looked at digital transformation and suggested that several things have occurred. To list some of them, he's saying, which everyone here will point to, the nature of work has changed, political system has changed, generational prospects have changed. What one generation did is not going to be what another generation will do. I am absolutely aware that I'm a dinosaur watching the comet coming to end my existence. There's a new breed of human beings outside there who were born connected to tablets and cell phones. And so their world is already different from mine. Business prospects have changed. Our interaction with the acquisition of things have changed. And again, this is important because it's looking at how people are changing. There was a point in time when to buy something, you actually had to go to a shop. You had to have an outing for the day and go to the major town. You had to go to the mall or the major shopping area. Now you just go online and Amazon it to your house. You know, if you're lucky, it will come straight to your door. It creates a whole different avenue of how we get things from the world. I personally enjoyed the part of COVID where people were actually delivering completely cooked meals, not KFC, but completely cooked gourmet meals to my door. I wish that would continue. Learning about the world has changed. Again, looking at the confluence between the technology and people. Ensconced in that algorithm bubble, a lot of people miss a whole lot of the world that does not occur in TikTok. My young niece and I are always at war because TikTok is on from the second she gets up in the morning, you know, and there's no evaluation of the information that she's receiving through TikTok. It's no better with adults. People go and Google something overnight and come back thinking that they're professionals in a subject matter. So, you know, how we learn is different. And interestingly, how we meet people is changing as well. Meeting used to be physical, now meeting is online. Your friend used to be someone that you went to school with and that you went home to, whose parents knew you, whose parents knew your parents. Now your friend is somebody that you exchange likes with on Facebook or Twitter or something like that. So the very nature of being human is changing in the context of this new environment. And so managing the digital transformation it becomes central. What competencies do we need to manage this transformation? We need technological competencies, clearly, but we need organizational competencies as well, such as managing generational diversity. One of the interesting things is that this is happening at the same time as people are living longer and people are staying in organizations longer, which means that you may be managing an organization that is going through digital transformation that has an 18-year-old working next to somebody who is now retiring at 70. How do you deal with that? And then again, I mean, well, listen to how human some of these issues are. Ethical challenges. What are the challenges of privacy, of data protection, of making sure that the algorithms that you are using are not exploitative, are not biased, are not driving bias, are not divisive, you know, in their impact on people. And all of it comes down to the question, can we control technological transformation? Or do we give up and say, it's happening to us? Are we the victims of digital transformation? You know, so we need to look at this gap between what the technology can do and what people can do and what people using the technology can do. We need to make choices about that. We need to look at the lessons that previous transformations have delivered. Previous transformations have shown us that if you remain stuck in a prior paradigm as a new paradigm unfolds, you will die. You are a dinosaur. You will die. You must convert. Previous transitions have shown that it is important to know what your purpose is as a business, as a state. What is your purpose? Why are you using these technologies? What are the technologies for? If you are using a technology that displaces 9/10 of your workforce, who's going to buy your product? You know, what are the consequences of increased unemployment going to be in your society? How do we adapt to the transition of the workforce from one place to another in the context of these transformations? And all of these are not technological questions. These are human questions that we have to answer. Do we know where we're going? What is our purpose? Can we learn from our mistakes? All of these are important questions that we have to grapple with as we go through the process of transformation in the various environments. And so I want to end by asking what I think are some of the most important questions to be answered as we grapple with digital transformation, and which will repeat some of these questions that I've asked. What's important, the process of transformation or the people? Are we transforming to make the process look good, or are we transforming to improve the impact, the well-being, the welfare of people that we serve? Who owns my data? What is property and privacy? If we are going into big data, if big data is important, especially if big data is important at the level of the state, who owns it, and can they use it for their own ends? Can they create algorithms using my data that I have surrendered to actually exploit me? Are we democratizing society, or are we excluding vulnerable communities? Because as I said earlier, some of us are still in the second industrial revolution. In the fourth industrial revolution, we may have no footing and no place. Will we create as much economic and employment opportunities as the new technologies displace? Will the basic disposable model of modern technologies be globally sustainable? Can we afford to keep throwing away an absolutely good cell phone every 2 years just because a new model has come out with a nicer screen or a better camera, and that actually adds no value to what the cell phone does? What is the acceptable collateral damage of digitalization and digital transformation? And finally, what does it mean to be human in the digital era? What does it mean to be human in the digital era? I realize that I've asked more questions than I've given information. I've probably not helped the program a whole lot, but thank you very much for having me start off the program nonetheless.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel, for that very informative opening discussion on exploration of digitalization as a transition and talking about the fourth industrial revolution. Next on our panel, to further our discussion, we have Mrs. Tiffany Powell-Williams. Mrs. Powell-Williams is the General Secretary of the Jamaica Civil Service Association, sorry. She has over 20 years experience in general management, in human resource management, labor relations and administration. She holds a postgraduate diploma in business administration from the 𝐂𝐻𝐿𝐼𝐻 University and a Bachelor of Science degree in business administration from the University College of the Caribbean. She also has received several certifications in the areas of industrial and labor relations, management studies. She is currently the General Secretary of the Jamaica Civil Service Association, one of the largest trade unions in Jamaica, and she also co-chairs on the Emergencies and Disasters and the Climate Crisis Steering Committee of Public Services International. Mrs. Powell-Williams is also a Service Excellence Program Ambassador with the Public Sector Modernization Division in the Office of the Cabinet. She is also an Executive Council member of the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions. She's a director of the Jamaica Civil Service Housing Company Board and a director on the board of the Jamaica Civil Service Association Limited. I now hand you over to Mrs. Tiffany Powell-Williams, who will discuss with us the experiences of the movement in Jamaica and the lessons to be learned by others who are now implementing digitalization policies. Mrs. Powell-Williams.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And let me take this opportunity to bring greetings to our brothers and sisters, to the fellow panelists, and of course, our host, the Elma Francois Institute. I listened to my colleague, Brother Ian, just now, and I was just smiling because some of those very questions do not necessarily have an answer, but it is food for thought and should propel some of the discussions that we will have during the course of this panel discussion. Let's look at the experiences of the movement in Jamaica and the lessons to be learned by others who are now implementing digitalization policies. And so in looking at some of these experiences, we will, of course, realize that digitalization and digitization have become the great accelerator, not just in the Caribbean, but across the world. I will be looking at some of the impact of digital transformation on workers, more so, and of course, on the businesses. I'll be looking at the trade unions' response to some of the challenges and opportunities, of course. And in a broader sense, the challenges of the digital revolution. Ian spoke about some of those things. I'll be looking at some of the experiences in Jamaica and linking that, the case for small island developing states, and of course, how it impacts our workers. A lot of this would have been pronounced more so because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this has enabled us to see the opportunities for a new foundation, to see the opportunities for scope and legitimacy of trade unions. We had a lot of workers being displaced. We had a lot of breaches of workers' rights during this pandemic. And so the impact brought on by COVID-19 would have led to many life changes in how we operate, especially as it relates to our working habits. Many of us can relate to terms such as remote work, teleworking, which have also become normalized in most sectors as employers have recognized the important roles that those digital technologies play in today's world. So when we look at the impact of digital transformation, what we would have seen over several months is that this impact, and I zoom in on education, because a lot of our educational facilities would have been shut down. And so we had an emergence of online teaching. I mean, teachers weren't prepared, they weren't geared for such platform or methodology. However, they were you know, I don't want to say forced, but they had to step up to that challenge of doing teaching in the virtual space. We have also seen it evidenced in the travel industry, where persons were able, and this is would have been seen as an opportunity. Persons could access their travel documents with just the scan of a QR code. So the pandemic would have offered several services, and I zoom in more particularly to the tax administration, Jamaica, and they were able to provide online services that normally you would have to go in line face to face. They were able to have these services online. Point to note that this move did not increase employment, albeit there was a shift in job focus. So there was a moving away from the manual type transactions to a more electronic or digital transaction. We have seen it also in the banking industry with automated banking systems, the online banking scenarios, and even the digitalization of remittances having reported positive changes to the remittance experience. And some of us can relate to the remittance experience. So it was like with the click of a button, especially on your mobile device, you can send and receive money. So there were no lines, no tellers, everything was strictly automated. But the question I ask, what about the human touch? What about the human touch when there was need for further assistance? The trade union response to this, and I, for one, as a union activist, I cannot fail to mention that trade unions would have seen some of these challenges, and we would have started taking the steps towards digitization and digitalization in order to remain relevant, because we must meet the demands of workers. It's workers who will be providing the public services, quality public services. And they are forced, they are now living and working in a digital environment. So, for example, the trade union, through its international affiliates, would have trained activists on their roles and responsibilities as digital rights organizers. And this move allowed our members to have better access to information, particularly on labor laws, on workers' rights, and to be more knowledgeable of the industrial relations climate, especially in the digital environment. We would have also digitized, and that's the Jamaica Civil Service Association, our membership application for accessibility, because we found that persons who were being victimized and were not members of a union, they were now coming to become members of union, especially the JCSA. So again, the COVID-19 would have presented many challenges, but it also presented opportunities. As we were able to move to more virtual meetings with members, we were able to keep them informed and updated, and our reach would have increased. So the relationship with our stakeholders also increased with improved access to unions. They were able to reach us much faster, and we were able to access and share information easier. So indeed, we're all moving towards transforming into a digital society. And we can see that Jamaica would have been making some strides in that regard. However, it's not a perfect, and I'm going to use Ian's term, algorithm, because there are challenges. there are still immense challenges faced as a result of this revolution. And we speak of the first to the fourth revolution. I'm not sure which one we fall in, some of us. But with digitalization and digitization, persons must consider that their information will be shared. And one such challenge is the growing skepticism surrounding data security and the lack of digital literacy. So issues around personal data in terms of where they are and how they're being used will always be in the minds of people. Concerns regarding the increased threat of cyber attacks and the theft of customers' data, the online attacks that can target system vulnerabilities, the poor setups, the unsuspecting users who are becoming ever more, it's increasing. So these are some of the challenges that we have to tackle as countries, and we must prioritize and have strategies to deal with these problems. One of the greatest challenges is the socioeconomic disadvantages as a result of this phenomenon. Persons in the vulnerable groups not having access to the device or even access to services. Children who are disadvantaged by not being able to afford, their parents are not able to afford internet access, especially for educational purposes. Albeit in the context of Jamaica, where the government provides tablets, especially for needy children, they have the instrument, but they don't have access to the service. So persons without access to internet or even having a device are at a disadvantage for factors such as academic performance and labor market success. A scenario in Jamaica, and I believe it probably is global, some workers who were tasked to work from home were provided with the necessary resources. However, the attending factors, such as an increased cost in utilities, proved challenging. So the public sector was clearly lagging in terms of providing the necessary infrastructure to maintain the dynamics of the work from home situation. And this was a major challenge. However, there were opportunities for improvements. So while automated services is seen as something good, the disadvantages are also equally daunting, as these services heavily rely on internet access. So you'll always have the concerns of interruptions or service issues, schedule maintenance, among other things, which sometimes results in inaccessibility to some services. And in the case of paying your taxes or any other service, you would now have to move to inline accessing services. So digitalization in Jamaica. Jamaica recently passed the National Identification System, the NIDS Act, which is a noteworthy example of the digitalization phenomenon. And just to zoom in on two leaders' perspective. So we had the president of the private sector organization of Jamaica in an article where he indicated that the argument surrounding these included issues such as biometrics, the data security and privacy. And what he indicated that fundamentally in the minds of Jamaicans, there was a deficit in trust. Juxtaposing that, the president of the Jamaica Civil Service Association, O'Neill Grant, in a presentation to the Joint Select Committee of Parliament reviewing the NIDS bill, stated that the National Identification System is necessary for Jamaica as a nation needs to identify not only who our nationals are, but also to ensure that we can deliver much needed public services of a high quality. So these issues indeed would have been long debated about, and we would have seen the major challenges. There is a high hesitancy by many, especially with the NIDS bill, because persons are afraid of sharing their personal data. They're not sure what's going to happen, who will have access, and all that. So when we speak about protection of personal information, the Jamaica Data Protection Act would serve, or should serve, to strengthen the rights of individuals. It should serve to strengthen the rights of persons so that they are informed about how their personal data are processed, to restrict the processing that is allowed, and to require correction or deletion of personal data in certain circumstances. And so the emphasis must be placed on ensuring that citizens are aware of the measures and policies that are in place to protect their information. The trade union, a key player, continues to have a key role to play in this regard, because it is the workers who will provide this service. It is the workers who will collect the data and ultimately be held accountable. So we must empower them, because we organize labor, we organize the workers, and in organizing the workers, we have a responsibility to empower them. The move towards digitization and digitalization will, of course, require the necessary skill sets. I mean, we speak of transformation, but you have to train, you have to inform, you have to educate, and we have to ensure that the software integration, the data analytics, the data migration, to name a few, that these tools are in place. The government of Jamaica must provide the requisite training and development in these areas. And important to note, it is a continuous process as the technology evolves. We're in the fourth revolution, the technology continues to evolve. So in the case of the small island developing states and how we leverage digitalization to achieve sustainable development goals, particularly goal number 8, which speaks to decent work and economic opportunities. SIDS, and zooming in again on Jamaica. States such as Jamaica are encouraged to accelerate their pace of digital transformation, right? And we seek to do this in order to unlock competitiveness, to optimize use of scarce resources, to improve service delivery, stimulate business opportunity, thereby creating sustainable jobs. But we cannot do this without employing the proper and necessary systems that will properly align these wishes. And we must involve all stakeholders. Small island developing states can take these challenges and strengths experienced by Jamaica into consideration as they continue to transform into digital societies. Learning to master and thrive in the digital world demands solid managerial and technical skills, and it will require policies and regulations for digital economy and, of course, a sustainable communication infrastructure. What's of the impact on workers? The reality is that the move towards a digitally transformed economy has seen an increase in inequality. Yes, there's an increase in the inequality in the workforce, where some workers are being overworked, some underworked, underpaid, and even displaced. And this happens as the technology is becoming more prevalent. The trade union advocacy must be a counterbalance to the profit motive of the employer, which involves cost containment and increased revenues. And so the trade union must ensure that we are there to factor workers' compensation to ensure that it is equitable and in line with the tasks and responsibilities that are given. We must ensure that the ILO decent work agenda is a principle in the digital transformation process. We must ensure that union policies and strategies are adapted, as well as the organizing methods are factored. And this will, of course, put new demands on external and internal union operations in terms of policies, skills, and building capacities. We must stand firm in our advocacy for people over profit. We have to advocate for strong occupational safety and health practices, particularly where remote work is being done. Digitalization is not a one-off activity. It is an ongoing process as technology evolves. It is at the heart of any transformation. And at the heart of any transformation is the people and the workers who provide the services. As Nagy Hanna said, its ultimate objective is to harness the global digital revolution to meet a country-specific socioeconomic priority. The process must be driven by vision, leadership, and most importantly, the partnership between the government, who is the employer, business, and labor representing workers. I do not have bold questions to ask, but I know that without the people, we can't have any revolution, we can't have any transformation. And again, what age are we in? Are some persons still in the first? Are some persons in the fourth? Let us all work towards ensuring that the principle of the decent work agenda is a part of the digital transformation process. Thank you.
It seems like we have lost our moderator.
Oh, wow. Candine.
Well, for the sake of keeping the ball rolling, then I will pick up from the most amazing speeches from you, Mrs. Powell-Williams, and you, Mr. Daniel. I'm Christina Colclough. I'm a long-term trade unionist, but now also a specialist on the digitalization of work and workers, but also how we can once again focus on the human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to ensure, exactly as the previous speakers have said, that this is a people-led change and transformation and not the other way around. So I work with unions, work organizations across the world, governments as well, in trying to turn the tides. And I will try to speak to why we need this. More than we've already heard, which is rather bleak sort of stories of the current state of affairs, which I think it is. And I think we need to just take stock for a second and say, how did we get here? What went wrong? And what do we need to change? So from an overall level, I want to talk a little bit about sort of the global politics of the digitalization trend before we start looking more at the world of work and workers. And then lastly, maybe zooming down to what we each and every one of us individually have to do. So my comments are much in line with the previous two speakers, but I want to really hammer home one thing. And to do so, I'm going to quote Tim Wu, who's an excellent author, who said in 2018, "We are suffering from the tyranny of convenience." And what he meant by that when he was talking about digital tools is that we have become almost addicts to the narratives, to the tools around digitalization. We love using our mobile phones. We love shopping online. It's easy. So these tools essentially speak to our laziness. And we become addicted. We become we couldn't imagine a life before the cell phone, although many of us here probably are from old enough to have lived before the cell phone. But it's also speaking of power. And here I think it's essential that we focus on the power relations. Before we discussed the power relations between labor, management, and the state, we now have a fourth actor. And that fourth actor are the developers of these digital technologies, with everything that then goes into those technologies, of instructions to the algorithms, of the norms, the cultural bases, the purposes, who has defined them, is essentially now down to those who have developed these technologies. It's hard to estimate. Some say between 92 and 96% of all digital technologies being used in workplaces, in public services today are third-party systems. Many of those are either developed in China or in the United States. So what we have is we have these digital systems sold, as Mr. Brown was saying, under the promise of increasing efficiency, productivity, smartness, and so on. But what we really have to look at is how all of this is playing out in a power perspective. Those who hoard the data, those who define the algorithm, those who set the instructions to those algorithms are also those who are increasingly gaining power. Power over democracy, power over governments, power in the workplace over the workers, and power over you as a citizen in your countries as you go about your everyday lives and as subject almost inescapably to these digital systems. Now, this is what is happening, and we all have seen that since COVID pandemic has come upon us, the companies who have 10, 20, 30, 50-folded their income are the big tech companies. They are becoming richer and richer and richer as we become more and more reliant on them. So there we are reliant on them on the one hand, and we have fallen for the tyranny of their convenience on the other, which has removed a lot of activism, has removed more and more people actually saying, does it have to be like this? Now, the very fact that we have right now a mode of digitalization, which is exploitative, which, as we were talking about before, around your data, which is turning you into nothing else but a sum of millions of data points that can be boxed and profiled, and you can be bought and sold on this market of how do we sell you more products, services, or should you have a job or not a job? This is all happening, and yet where has the revolution been from the people? Well, we're stuck between this dependency and conveniency, and my first call here is to say it doesn't have to be like this. You know, as any digital or technological transformation, any social system, economic system, it is all about shaping and forming it so that we are not there to adapt to the technology, but as Mr. Brown and Mrs. Powell-Williams said, that the technology is there to serve us. Currently, this technology is not here to serve us. It is here, yes, to appeal to our laziness, but essentially it is not serving us. And this leads me then to our governments. What are they doing about it? Are they doing enough about it? And here I have to admit, no, the answer to both of those questions is a blatant no. Yes, there are some data protection regulations being formed around the world. There are now popping up countries who are discussing the ethics of artificial intelligence, how we should regulate artificial intelligence systems, and so forth. But they are far from doing enough. And this leads me then to the question of why. Now, two reasons, main reasons. One, they have fallen for the narrative. You digitalize your public services, your government, and your country will become more effective. And as Mrs. Powell-Williams was saying, we'll be able to utilize its resources much better. This is a narrative which, if we look at things, really has not proven to be valid at all in reality, but is still very, very long-standing. I ask, productive actually for whom? For what? At what cost does this productivity come? If it, as Mr. Daniels said, comes at the cost of people, a vast amount of people losing their jobs, well, was that really then particularly effective? So that's one thing. We also have governments who lack, and both speakers have talked about this, the actual competencies to really understand what it is they're supposed to be regulating. This has become evident in many of the board positions I hold in international fora, where it is notable how governments seem to fall back on some of the traditional topics that they know, skills, for example. Yes, we need more people in STEM, but that's not enough when actually what is at stake here is our human rights, our right to be human, as Mr. Daniel also mentioned. Our right to, and the government's duty to protect those fundamental rights, freedoms, and autonomy, but they don't know, because these systems are complex as they are, actually how to pinpoint and see and observe the attacks on those freedoms, autonomy, and rights. So we have government who are lagging behind, who are not daring really to regulate across countries and borders. And we have a tech world who is spending millions and millions of dollars in persuading us all of our need of their tools. So there we have it. Now into the world of work, it is absolutely wonderful, I have to say, to observe how unions all over the world are really grasping now this topic. What should be the union demands in relation to the digitalization of work and workers? Here, huge legal gaps are going to have to be filled by collective bargaining. Some of the most pertinent, which we've discussed today, are data rights. Now, interestingly, and this I can observe no matter in what region of the world, why are workers, apart from a little bit in Europe in the GDPR, the European Data Protection Regulations, why are workers not explicitly mentioned in 99% of the world's data protection regulations? Why are workers not involved more by right and law in the governance of these digital technologies being introduced in their workplaces? Where are the workers? Now, the whole concept of a worker, we seem to have been sort of almost over the last 20 years told we're something different than a worker. You are a specialist, you're a doctor, you are an engineer, you are this or this, you are a builder, you're a carpenter. We seem to have forgotten that every single wage earner out there is also a worker. So the whole concept of a worker has fallen off the radar. If governments hold any events on digitalization, they have the consumers there, they have businesses there, but how often do they actually invite the trade unions to the table? So therefore, it is with amazing joy that I see the rise of trade unions focusing on this. As I said, the first thing that we really need to bridge the gap on is workers' data rights. I am very, very nervous of how otherwise diverse and inclusive labour markets are narrowing in as more and more people are hired by automated hiring systems, which automatically and are set, don't forget, from China or the United States mainly, define who is a good worker? We all know that in the United States, being a union person is not necessarily seen as particularly positive. Will you, because you have pictures on Facebook of being out there rallying for a strike, or do you show otherwise socialist tendencies, will you automatically be rejected for an interview to a job? What are the instructions, as Mr. Daniel was saying, to these algorithms? How do we ensure that they respect, again, our fundamental right to the freedom of association? But in relation to the workplaces, what happens to all of the data that the workplaces are now collecting on the workers? What do they use them for? Do they move them, sell them? What inferences, profiles are being made, which can be horribly wrong? Shouldn't the workers by default have a right to see, to know, to object, to have a say over the use of this data? The same goes in public services for the citizens in a country. Shouldn't they know if they are subject to some obscure algorithm measuring whether they are likely to predict tax fraud or social fraud of any kind or whatnot? Predictive algorithms are the big thing in public services. And again, as I think Mrs. Powell-Williams was saying, where is the multi-stakeholder governance around this? It is, again, lacking. But also in relation to workplaces, we have had a tradition of dialogue between management and labor. This is the whole raison d'etre of the unions and the employers. Where is the dialogue around these digital technologies? Now, I know very, very few managers in both public services and private companies across the world who by themselves actually want to engage in a dialogue. This then leads me to the fact, do they actually know the powers and the potentials of the systems they're introducing? Have they done a rights-based impact assessment? Have they actually identified what risks can there be of bias and discrimination, of all sorts of other negative side effects, which we heard about before, of overwork, of continuous surveillance, of, you know, the sort of upping of all things evil, because we might be caught out by this monitoring system. And unfortunately, in most of the employers that I speak to, they say we do not govern these technologies from a rights-based perspective. If we do, we look at risks, the risks of hacking, the risk of data breach, but they really don't look at the impact, unintended as well as intended, of these systems on the workers. So let's go back to our thought example. We have maybe a scheduling tool designed in the United States, deployed in Trinidad and Tobago, or in Jamaica, and that tool really sort of has a preference for the white man. They have proven through the data to be fastest, for example. How will that system, when deployed in your countries, be received? Will it be discriminative? Who is responsible for actually checking the algorithms? Now, in my worldview, that should be the employers, but they don't. So we are in a situation where we are being increasingly commodified. We are increasingly subject to these algorithmic influences, which maybe have nothing to do with us, maybe come from totally different parts of the world, leading to this whole discussion of digital imperialism. So workers should have a seat at the table in relation to the governance of these systems in workplaces. Here it is pertinent, because it is the unions who have the ear closest to the ground, that the unions adopt a watchdog function. Ask the questions, you know, why and who has told this automated hiring system how to hire the right people? Why are certain people rejected? Why do the last 6 candidates who got a job all seem to have a similar profile? These will have to be the union's questions as we go forward. And then let me end with a little bit of a focus on you, on us as individuals, what we can do. Now here I want to echo Professor Shoshana Zuboff, who in many ways has led sort of the term we're living in the age of surveillance capitalism. And let me remind you that that cell phone that you have probably lying next to you now, that you probably go nowhere without, is one of the biggest surveillance tools that exists out there. There's 14 sensors inside your cell phone. It knows what it can hear you speak to your phone. It can see you take photos and videos with your phone. It also incidentally knows, of course, where you are. You use your phone, maybe Google Maps or one of the others, to find your way from A to B. It also knows how you're traveling from A to B, at what speed. So it knows most likely if you are walking, running, taking the car. It knows how often you do those things or you don't do them. So your phone is continuously creating profiles of you. Those profiles, we must ask, who gets them? This leads back to one of the first questions: who owns your data? Now, personally, I think data ownership is a bit of a false concept, because you can't really own something that once it's out there, it gets replicated. But who has the rights over this data? At the minute, it is many, many apps that you have installed on your phone without probably ever reading the privacy policies. Not surprising, given that the majority of them are over 29 pages long. Anyhow, your cell phone. So number one, what can we do? Now and again, turn it off. Now and again, go somewhere without it. Put a VPN on your phone. Make sure that you somehow are confusing the algorithms. Now, this is one little thing. Secondly, if some of you are thinking, wow, I've done nothing wrong, who cares if they take my data from my Facebook profile or whatever, I've done nothing wrong, it doesn't really matter. Here we have to remember, brothers and sisters, that what you do potentially affects the lives of others, of people you will never meet, of people who haven't even been born yet. If out of your life and your health status and your jobs and what you do and what you don't do, it's created a profile, then that can affect the work and life chances of somebody else. We have to remember solidarity. So really, now and again, be very careful what you put on social media. Be very careful that you don't just give up on everything that is your privacy. And never, ever give in to the debate saying we should be paid for our privacy, because then what we essentially agreeing to is that we are commodities who can be bought and sold. Another thing we can do is start demanding from our governments that they take real action. Across the world, many governments now are discussing various forms of certifications of these systems, which is, for me, an obscure debate. How do you certify something that by nature changes? So if you certify something, you certainly also need to govern that. The problem is, in most of these governmental discussions, governance has no role. So we need the multi-stakeholder governance. We need to demand that of our governments. We need to ask of our governments, if they do any public procurement, who has the right over our data? Who is defining the algorithms? Who is determining the purposes of these systems? And if it isn't you, you should demand that you have a seat at that table. So let me end here with this little rant on what we should be doing, is really urging everybody to take a stance on this, to have a voice on this. The current trajectory that we are on is exploitative. It is certainly not in the interest of people, nor in the interest of our planet. We have to work together in all areas of the world, small and large, to really put demands on the table so this technology serves us and not the other way round. You are far more than a commodity that can be bought and sold to the highest bidder. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. 𝘿𝐿𝐿, for that very informative discussion. I want to take this time to thank all the members of the panel. We were fortunate to have a wide range of speakers talking about basically the same topic, which was digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation. I want to thank all the participants who would have posed the questions on both YouTube and on Facebook. And at this time, we will have, I have some questions from persons who were looking on. And the first question goes to Dr. 𝘿𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐻. What is the distinction between digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation? So I will repeat the question. What is the distinction between digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation?
Academic. That's how I would put it. It's an academic distinction. Yes, there are certain people who go in there and define the difference between digitalization and digitalization and digital transformation. It doesn't really matter. Now, speaking as an activist, what we here are talking about is the digitalization of work, workers, society, citizens, government services, and so forth. That is by nature a transformation. So there, you know, when we're talking about what is it, so what is different, and here I really appreciate the discussion of the various industrial revolutions before, that we have to realize that this is not an equal game, and that those who don't have the same access to being subject to these systems or being able to log into them and benefit from them or use them are already at a disadvantage. But don't worry, big tech is standing on the doorsteps waiting for the right moment to build that extra mobile tower to give people more internet access against, of course, the demand of keeping their data. So what is different though, and I think we have to realize this, is the breadth and the depth of this digital change or this change. When data is being used to profile us, and again, quoting Zsuzsanna Zuboff, who is really calling for the demand to ban markets in human futures. What she means by that is to ban the buying and selling of all of these data profiles, which are affecting who gets a bank loan, who gets a job, who gets an opportunity to buy a house, and so forth. There, I think it is essential that we understand that this sticks so deep, it sticks into, and Mr. Daniels said this, it sticks into the very core of our understanding of our rights and freedoms as humans. So, I mean, don't get lost in digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation. Just focus on that this is a change which is facilitated or pushed by digital technologies, and those digital technologies by nature go very wide and very deep into our rights, freedoms, and autonomy.
Thank you very much, Dr. 𝘿𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐻, for clearing that up of what the distinction between the three are. But there's another question for you, Dr. 𝘿𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐻. And the question goes, what are your thoughts on cryptocurrency and the potential impact of the delivery of quality public service? I will repeat. What are your thoughts on the cryptocurrency and the potential impact on the delivery of quality public service?
So there's various impacts on this. Cryptocurrency is an alternative currency. Why go to an alternative currency if you don't have something to hide? Why not just stay within the currencies that we have? That's number one. Number two is, of course, that cryptocurrencies, they're very volatile. They're being used for tax evasion, whitewashing, this and that. You know, cryptocurrencies is not the answer to delivering quality public services at all. And don't forget, cryptocurrencies are huge, have a huge negative impact on our environment. The energy that is used to calculate these cryptocurrencies, the buying and selling of them, is enormous. So for me, there is no direct link between cryptocurrency and quality public services. On the contrary, how do you tax cryptocurrency trading? And taxation is the formation and the foundation of the public services, well, of course, budget. So no, don't buy into that. There's nothing wrong with the ordinary currency systems we have. Of course, they can be attacked and so forth, but we need to realize that every single company, digital platforms, brick and mortar companies, every single citizen has to pay the tax due. Otherwise, there can not be quality public services. And we all deserve quality public services, which are universal and equal for all.
Thank you again, Dr. 𝘿𝐿𝐼. And we have another question for the entire panel. How can unions respond to the influence of digital transformation to ensure workers' benefits? So how can the unions get involved in the influence of digital transformation to ensure that workers benefit?
So, of course, as my fellow panelists would have intimated, when we speak of workers, we have to ensure that workers form part of any decisions being made about them. It is the people that is important, and the workers will be the ones providing the necessary services to the wider populace. So, of course, our collective bargaining agreements, union representation will have to be included, and using the tool of the collective bargaining process to ensure that, one, we protect workers' rights, because digital transformation will not stop. We are in an ever evolving, technologically driven world, and we must prepare ourselves. We are already in it, but how we ensure that our workers are protected, the workers must be knowledgeable. And we ourselves as union leaders, as a trade union movement, as Christina said, we need to know, who owns the data, who are the power players behind all this. So through the collective bargaining mechanism, of course, we will need to ensure that the workers' right is protected and that the digitalized world does not take over and we have just strict automation and the non-adherence of the principles, the ILO principles of the fundamental rights of humans, human dignity, or the right to organize. When you have all these digital spaces and tools, how do we organize? Right? So we have to ensure that the trade union movement, more so now than ever, is at the core. And we have to ensure that we put out that human rights is workers' rights, and workers' rights ultimately is human rights.
Thank you.
Can I add, Sadine, can I add something to that? Because absolutely, and I just love that workers' rights are human rights and human rights are workers' rights, and we should claim them. But I also want to add one thing with the unions. Be very, very careful how you yourself transform into this digital world. Make sure, you don't use tools which essentially will turn you into mini big techs in relation to your members. Don't gather more data than you need. Don't push your members to be online too much. Be careful using certain messaging tools which are owned and controlled by certain of the big tech companies that we know are not out there for the good of the unions. So yes, we need to externally focus on policies, on collective bargaining, on pushing the governments to take more responsibility. And internally, the union should really start pushing for responsible and privacy-preserving technology, and not just jump on the bandwagon because it might, be handy here and now.
Thank you, Dr. Christina. Mr. Daniel, I have a question for you. Well, it's actually a two-part question. So the first part goes, what would you say to a person?
I don't get to answer the other question.
Can you repeat?
I don't get to answer the previous question. That everybody else answered, and then you could ask me that.
Oh, sure, you can add your piece to that.
Okay. What I wanted to say is that I'm taking from Dr. Christina and Tiffany as well. But I want to preface by saying I'm coming from the specific context of what's been happening in Trinidad and Tobago for a while. And quite frankly, there was a young man who a few years ago got thoroughly panned for saying that trade unionists are dinosaurs, and suggesting that they are not, they are unaware of the impending extinction. Unfortunately, he has been turning me slowly to that conclusion. We've become trapped in our old paradigm, and we are turning a battleship that it seems to be taking forever to get reoriented. We have decreasing trade union membership, which in itself decreases the utility of collective bargaining for so many people. I'm not saying collective bargaining is unimportant, but what I'm saying is that there are so many people out there who are being affected by what is happening, who are outside of the umbrella of trade union representation. And what we have to do as trade unionists is figure out how to change with the paradigm. The factory is no longer our location. We have to figure out how to represent those people who have not been traditionally represented, the people in the informal sector, migrant workers, especially undocumented migrants. We have to figure out how to represent workers in transitionary kinds of service industries who can be in one organization today and another one tomorrow. And a lot of this has to do not just with policy at the level of the organization, but policy at the level of the state. We have to figure out how to be political without being political, because so many of us have fallen by the wayside in entering into partisan types of politics. And we have to, in my opinion, focus on empowering workers and members, the people who are on the ground, making sure that they know what they're getting into, that they know what they're signing when they sign their employment contracts, that they read their employment contracts, that they read their job descriptions, and that they have somewhere that they can go to ask, does this make sense? Does this challenge my rights? Does this protect my interests? And as Tiffany and Christina said, the bottom line for as far as I can see it, humbly for trade unionism today, is that our center has to be workers' rights are human rights. Whatever sphere we take it into. Collective bargaining is one, but we have to go wherever we need to go to establish that workers' rights are human rights. And I done preach there.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. So you can stay on. So this is your question now. What would you say to someone who argues that we are simply resistant digitalization because we are generally resistant to change? And how can we really embrace the potential benefits of technology within our current mindset?
Okay, well, what I would say to them is that in my mind, I'm a futurist like Tony Stark. I'm Iron Man. He's not necessarily my favorite superhero, but I like to think that I'm a futurist as well. I generally don't believe in the old time days, but things change. Things change, and you can never go home again. All right. Saying things change, however, does not mean that I am a victim of change. Does not mean that things change and I just have to accept them. Things change in conjunction with me, in a tension with me, a tension with what I need, with what I want, with the world I want to see, with the things that I want to have happen, with the lives that I want my nieces and nephews to live, with the freedoms that I believe are important. And I'm preaching again, I apologize. But the point is that if I resist change, I resist change because I don't think that the change that you're trying to push onto me is a change that I need. There are alternatives. There are always alternatives. Nike used to create their products in clean rooms in the United States and use sweatshops in Asia to create the same products. So there are always alternatives in terms of how you combine technology and human beings. There are always alternatives in how you respect humanity in the context of technology. And to go back into my world of comic books, just because you can do something doesn't mean you have to do it. All right. So as the other panelists have said, we need to sit at the table and say, this is the kind of change we want, not that. And if you tell me that I'm wrong for doing that, then I willingly accept it. I love my cell phone. I love my cell phone, but like Dr. Christina, I love to turn it off as well. And when I first turned it on and it said to me, do you want to let your friends know where you were, where you are? I went, hey, that's a good idea. No. And I disabled that immediately. So we have to become more informed as people about ourselves, about our rights, about what it means to be human, about our dignity, about preventing, Tiffany, sorry, you're preaching this morning, about preventing others from exploiting us, about being aware that a cell phone is not neutral. It is an act of power, as Christina has pointed out, and how it fits into our lives. And we need to participate in deciding how we want that done. If that is resisting, I'm resisting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Daniel. This question goes out to the entire panel. Well, this question and the other one. The question states, what are your thoughts on organizations going back to pre-pandemic normal and in ignoring the benefits of digitalization they obtained during the pandemic? So what are your thoughts on organizations going back to pre-pandemic normal and ignoring the benefits of digitalization obtained during the pandemic?
I'm looking at Tiffany for a union response there. Do you want to go for it, Tiffany?
Okay, so who defines normal? Is it me? Is it you? Is it Google, Microsoft? Who defines what is normal? As I indicated before, and I would have heard also from my colleague panelists, we cannot stop change. However, we can control the things around us. We can make decisions that will affect us and ultimately our families. The whole process of digitization, it has its pros and it does have its cons. And how we utilize information. So, for example, in Jamaica, we have a system that we call the primary exit profile. I just wanted to zoom in. And this is a standard of how children are assessed at the primary level from grades 3 to grade 6. That setup in and of itself, who developed that setup? That setup says that your child is more advanced than another child because your child got 80s while another child might received below that. And so how children are assessed from that age and stage right up to the tertiary level. Is that normal? Or is that the new normal? Who defines what normal should be? So coming back to why we must be a part of the process, because parents said that they needed to be a part of that process because the process seemed discriminatory. The process seemed to be lacking. The process had biases. A child's ability should not solely be left to what we call an assessment tool that was developed by God knows who or God knows from where. So we cannot stop change, but we can control the narrative that is being set up in a lot of the tools, in a lot of these assessments. We speak about the transformation of the public sector. Are the unions involved? It's the people, it's the workers. Well, question, is it the workers who are transforming or is it the systems? So yes, transformation might be good, but on the other end, it can have some negatives to it. What is the main objective of everything that we do that will be leading to the change? Who will be impacted greatly? What about those who are most vulnerable? And so I say normal or new normal. Who defines it? It's not an answer that I have, but certainly we have to ensure that it's not the power yielders that will determine what normal is to be or what the new normal, as I would have heard the terminology in the pandemic, at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic is.
Yes, Dr. 𝘿𝐿𝐼.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love that. Who defines normal? But if I hear the question correctly, it seems to also be about working from home. You know, and some organizations now want us all to come back to the office and da-da-da. And yeah, I mean, that was normal before. And if you were allowed to work from home, it maybe was once a month or once a year, maybe. I hear a lot of workers around the world who really enjoy the possibility to work from home. They say they're more productive, they don't get disturbed as much, etc., etc. I just want to, being the critique as I am, I just want to give a little bit of a word of a warning. I wrote an article called The Future of Unsustainable Work, which was a think sort of article, a reflection article on what would be the ultimate consequence if more and more workers worked from home. Well, we've already seen it. We see companies, workplaces shrink the office space. We have also begun to we've also seen the beginning of a changing employment contract. Now, this was confirmed by some employers in the United States who said, why should I permanently employ somebody who's never here anyway? So they said they would turn them into contract workers. So we need to be sure that if we start pushing for the right to work from home, that this will come with consequences. The risk, of course, is that the permanent employment contract will go out of fashion. The second thing will be that the workspace won't have enough room for you and your colleagues. So it will not be a choice. You will be forced to work from home. And we have to also see, are we then shifting the costs from the employer to the individual worker? And as we heard in the beginning, this is the cost of utilities. It's a rising housing cost, etc., etc. Workers don't need to shoulder more costs right now. You know, so really think of it socially, economically, have that critical angle. What could the consequences of consequences be? For sure. It's not necessarily something we should just go out there and praise at the end of our, uncritically, this working from home.
Thank you, Dr. 𝐿𝐿. And our final question to the entire panel. I haven't seen any more questions.
I don't get to answer the question yet, again.
Sure, Mr. Daniel, go ahead.
As a misanthrope, I love staying home. You know, and you see my shirt, you're not seeing my short pants. You know, this is heaven to me. And under these conditions, I've actually met the most amazing people like Miss Powell Williams, like Dr. Christina. I mean, there have been benefits to doing work like this. I'm now going to search the future of unsustainable work, because it falls into so much of the things that I've been thinking about as well. And I'd love to remain in contact with the two members of the panel as we develop these ideas. But everything has consequence, as Dr. Christina is pointing out. You know, me being home meant that I started working 17-hour days without even noticing that it happened. You know, the first time I noticed it was when my back started to hurt, and then I noticed my stomach had become a bare keg and not a six-pack. You know, there was so many things that were happening, and a lot of people became redefined as contractors rather than employees. You know, so again, you can never go home. You cannot unring the bell. You cannot unspill the milk. There are things that have happened that we will have to now try to control and define going forward. There are things that we are going to have to try to hold on to not lose. Rights, as I always say, are things that you fight for, but if you don't continue fighting for them, they are things that you will lose going forward. So it is a dynamic process. It's a dialectic process. Some people are going to like the new environment more. I hate the term new normal. There is no such thing. Every day is a day that is normal on that day, you know. And we are going to have to continuously fight to define the world that we live in. But reality is, there is no pre-COVID world. There will never be a pre-COVID world. There's only how do we make the best of where we are now going forward, and hopefully, how do we use the experience to plan for the next COVID, because you know it coming. So now you could ask the next question, please. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Daniel. So the final question is, by your assessment, does digital transformation translate into greater losses or greater profitability for the telecom company, more so in the pandemic environment?
I mean, I can pitch in on that. So if we look at many parts of the world, Africa, Latin America, the majority of people access the internet through their mobile phones. So the spread of mobile technologies is huge, and is also, again, being a little bit critical, entrapping people onto necessarily using those devices, using those apps. We then have telco companies, many parts in many regions of the world, that bundle big tech social media data into their subscriptions. So if you use WhatsApp, you're not leeching on your data. But if you want to use something more privacy preserving like Signal, you are. So this is a way of forcing certain particular behaviors. So are telco companies benefiting from this? Well, absolutely, yes. I think, though, if you start mapping out telco companies, you'll see they're more or less conglomerates owned by particular people, nations, and so forth. So yes, I mean, we're dependent on them again, but we should not be critically so. And right now, I think there's need for a more critical voice and demands around also how they use our data, sell it, give access to it, and so forth. And we have grim examples of how telcos have sold data to parties that really are harming our privacy rights. So they're benefiting, but they shouldn't benefit as they are.
If I could go next to ensure that one of the ladies gets the last word instead of this sexist man talking last kind of mansplaining thing. I had an experience a long time ago when I was actually in Kenya on the veldt and, touristing and watching this large expanse of land just unfolding with only wild animals. And then out of the green, oh, hold on, girl, you might want that pencil later. Out of the green, there's this Maasai warrior in full ceremonial garb, just strode out in red and everything, and everybody was, oh, look at him, This is the bush. This is the real Africa. And he stopped and reached into his bag and pulled out a cell phone and opened it and went, hello. Yeah, because in the middle of the bush, telecommunications was literally his only way of keeping in contact over huge distances. And so for me, that kind of captures the conundrum. We need them. They are necessary to how we live, but do we need to be at their mercy? The reality of the world, as far as I can see it today, is that online is where the economy is going to be. And therefore, all of us will need essentially an infrastructure that penetrates 100% of our society to enable everybody to be able to use what they need to use. But does that mean that we are at the mercy of mercenary telecommunications companies. No, this is a national infrastructure. This is air, this is water, this is electricity. This is something that a country needs, and therefore a country should be able to determine the way in which it operates for the benefit of the society. Make your money, but don't hold a gun to the heads of my people.
And just to add that, yes, as we all know, businesses are set up to make profits. But I, for one, stand firm in the whole approach where we must be able, we must realize, we must stand firm in our approach that people is necessary to make profits. So Public Services International has this message that we must ensure that we look about the people. So it's people over profit. And we have to advocate for occupational safety and health practices and standards, especially if we're speaking about the whole remote work or work from home. You know, a lot of workers were expected to work from home during the pandemic. Some given a laptop, but then what about the internet? You know, what was the infrastructure that was set up to communicate with the back office? So while we are approaching, and I do agree with you, Ian, that, you know, there's no new normal. We get up every day and we just have to do what we have to do. Every day is a normal day, and it comes back to when I say who determines normal. What's the definition of normal? When we're speaking about people being the core, being the heart, being at the center of everything that we do, particularly in relation to providing quality public services. So we have to protect workers' rights, and we have to maintain that people stands over profit.
Thank you, Mrs. Powell-Williams. Are there any closing comments from any of the panelists? Yes, Dr. 𝐿𝐶𝐿.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more to the conversation is I really, given what this panel has been discussing, and what really, if I can sort of put it in an umbrella, is we need governmental action of a different kind than we've had, and we need them to realize that this is the interest of the people, its human rights, autonomy and freedom, which should be at the center of this digital change. And it's not. Let me just stress that. And it won't be, and here is the addition, if current digital trade rules are adopted in multilateral trade agreements. Now, this sounds very, very technical, but for those of you who are interested in stuff like this, look at the discussions happening on the fringes of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. They will literally prevent that any government has the right to form an industrial transformation in its people's interest. It will subordinate people to profit. And again, this is a big topic, but the more people who would be engaged in this, the more we will be able to say to our governments, take responsibility and don't just go woof woof to the powers of especially big tech. Thank you.
Any other closing comments?
What she said.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Daniel. So at this time, we have come to the end of our very informative webinar on digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation. And at this point, I would like to thank each panelist Dr. Christina Kalkau from the Wynot Lab, Mr. Ian Daniel from the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, and lastly, Mrs. Tiffany Powell-Williams from the Jamaica Civil Service Association. I thank you all very much on behalf of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies and the Elma Francois Institute of Research. I would like to say thank you to all of you all and do have a pleasant day.
Thank you too. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.